Going on, everyone? I'm here joined by Dan Neissany. He's a physical therapist and healthcare consultant, is the founder of Best Practice Strategies. He's here today to kind of talk to us about his story, what took him from clinician to what he's doing now in the consulting space. So, Dan, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So just to kind of kick things off, just want to kind of have you walk me through, what ultimately led you to becoming a PT back in the day, when you went through that path and kind of deciding in those college years of what you want to do with your life. Kind of walk me through that step and what ultimately made you decide to become a PT.
Yeah, it was all about the money. No, I mean, really, yeah, that's like got in the wrong profession if that's the goal. No, I mean, at the end of the day, really, dude, it was all about, trying to figure out how to best help people. And there's obviously a number of ways we can obviously all do that. You're helping people financially speaking. I had a big sports background, trying to
Mhm.
figure out how I could maybe work with athletes. And then just, over time, kind of really got to a point where I figured out just helping people in pain physically is how I wanted to actually do that. So that's what it led me down that pathway. Got out of athletic training, which is what I was originally going to school for up at William Patterson,
Mhm.
and just shifted over to physical therapy, a little bit more flexibility, so to speak. And yeah, I think that's pretty much kind of got me down that path.
And you spent a good amount of time in that space before you ultimately made the jump to doing what you're doing now. And one of the things I wanted to make a note of was you kind of came in as a clinician out of school, started out, and then were in charge of working at a company actually here in Jersey and a big part of their growth. You were able to take the company from, I believe, 8 people all the way up to 150 people, which in the space of physical therapy is pretty tough to do, especially nowadays. So kind of walk me through what led you to get into that role when you did, as well as what that role really entailed versus just being an everyday clinician. Like you were in charge of spearheading that growth. So kind of share with our listeners about that.
Yeah, I mean, we all start out at the same spot, right? And that's just anything in life. We all start at zero, or you all start out at entry level, and
Mhm.
then you have to figure out what is the path that makes the most sense for me. Is it just, I say just, but do I want to treat patients, do my notes, and go home and be amazing at that, or do I want to maybe step into a position where I can supervise, direct, manage, however you want to call it, and maybe help the company grow in a different way outside of treating patients. So for me, the benefit, just myself personally, is I have parents who are entrepreneurs, and the greatest lesson I got from them, honestly, was just work ethic. It's just one of those things as you're an entrepreneur, you're working your ass off, and you're spending a lot of time away from the family. That it's very easy to look back and like my dad does this where he's like, I kind of regret maybe missing all these games and whatnot. But for me, I'm like, the best thing you taught me was how to actually just work,
Yeah.
which is nowadays something that we kind of, you don't take that for granted. You find an employee who busts our ass, like, thank God, like I missed this. So for me, I put the work in, I got better at my craft, and then I just wanted to know what really progression looked like for me. And for I think very far in advance. So, getting to a point where I may be 28, 29, and then thinking, is this it for the next 30 years? Where I think a lot of us end up, that really wasn't ideal. So it was just really a strong focus on understanding what does growth and development look like. And as I did that, that really kind of took me to a point where it made sense for me, at least, to maybe become a director. And
Mhm.
then knowing what does that actually entail from the standpoint of helping the company. And, one of the things in healthcare is a lot of us are very altruistic and we focus on the patient side of it. But then there's this other side of the business that we sometimes just don't want to know about. Or it's like, well, it's like evil if you're talking about
Yeah.
business and healthcare. But at the end of the day, healthcare is a business. So that's really what the big thing for me was understanding what goes into running a successful practice, and really more so what goes into running a successful business. Like, what does that actually entail?
Mhm.
Um, and you mentioned, it's not typical for a physical therapist. When we're in school, we're taught, a lot of us are still taught, open your own practice, and then we get no business training. And there's still, and I ask new graduates this just to make sure, as I've gotten older, that my opinions aren't outdated. But I'll still ask them, do you get taught about how evil chiropractors are? And some of them are like, yeah, we still get taught that we shouldn't sound patients to them. I'm like, and this is the mentality that limits a lot of practices, is that it has to be just us. So you go to
Mhm.
school, you become a physical therapist, and then it's open a physical therapy clinic and only hire physical therapists. So they don't understand this concept of having different services, market expansion, things that if you instill it in the right way can significantly grow a clinic to, like you said, going from maybe 8 employees to 150.
Absolutely. And I think that ties into a lot of what I do with clients as well is, in our industry, it's very common to kind of gatekeep clients, right? And you only want to be the person working with them. But what I
Yep.
found was I've had the most success when the attorneys, the CPAs, the mortgage lenders, the real
Yes.
estate agents are all in the same room or working with the same types of people produces the best outcomes. And from my perspective, as someone who's not a physical therapist, it's like I remember through my experience rehabbing my ACL, the place that I went to had PTs, it had athletic trainers, it had chiropractors, it had occupational therapists, like it had everything.
Yep.
And the business was, from my perspective, was crushing it. And then later found out it is actually crushing it because there's a little, could be a little misleading of what you see, as I'm sure you know. But so when you took that from 8 to 150, was that really what you guys ended up doing? Was kind of expanding those services? Can you elaborate a little more on like
Yeah,
what
I
those
mean,
services look like?
the practice I joined initially was a mom and pop chiropractic center. There was two chiropractors, and then they started bringing on physical therapists, and then we started hiring athletic trainers, then occupational therapists, and acupuncture, and we just, you look at there's really two things. It's number one is how to better serve your clients, or in our case, patients, right?
Yep.
So maybe a patient would benefit from a spinal adjustment. Okay. Some physical therapists are wonderful at it. The majority of them are not. So does it make more sense for me to try or send to the expert? And that's the thing when we're in the realm of I want the best person to do the job. Therefore, it's why would I keep sending that business out as opposed to just trying to bring it into what I'm already doing? How can I utilize that service to complement what I'm already doing with patients? And then understanding there is a business side that some patients require more than what insurance allows them, right? And as a physical therapist or occupational therapist or even a chiropractor, maybe you have a certain amount of visits, or maybe the person gets hurt and needs a lot of care, or they have chronic pain. And instead of saying, "Hey, Mrs. Jones, we gotta let you go and discharge you, even though you're still in pain and getting better, but this is just where you're at with your visits," versus, "Hey, Mrs. Jones, we have this other person that can still give you relief and can still keep your care going, even though you just can't treat directly with me."
Mhm.
So that's what it allowed us to do is just understanding what services can help and how do we actually just complement each other. Like you said, it'd be opening a brokerage and having, I got my accountant over here, the tax guy, the bookkeeper, like everything all under one roof. And we're all talking to each other, collaborating on how to best help you. That's what essentially we did.
Yeah, and it's like that abundance mindset of a lot of
Yes.
times I think there's like that mindset when you come out of school of like if you start a practice, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just so worried about getting patients. And then when I get them, how do I keep them for just me?
Yes.
And I felt that way too, honestly, when I started. Like there wasn't enough business to go around. And once you start to get traction, I think you start to see that and you're like, there's more than enough business to go around if you're good at what you do, right? And even the people that aren't, unfortunately, they'll get business too because there's just so much to go around. But bringing that in house, I think that's definitely a good idea and something for younger therapists thinking about this of should I start a business or maybe even working somewhere that they could be the physical therapist that that person brings on to expand their services. Like you said, taking a leap of faith with the chiropractor, which probably might have been a little bit like taboo, I guess, for you to do that.
No, I
Um,
mean it's what it really comes down to because my first clinic that I worked at, it was a similar structure. They had doctors, they had
okay.
chiropractors, and even though same thing, I was taught in school like don't work with a chiropractor or like this and that. I'm like it's a very closed mentality. It's a
Yeah.
very closed-minded kind of person that's telling you that as opposed to actually having discussions, and there'd be a lot less issues I mean, globally, but definitely in healthcare, if we just actually sat down, like, all right, how do you treat patients? Like, how do you work with them? What do you do? What do I do? And how can we maybe work together to actually improve the experience? And that's really all it came down to is just being open to conversations. And really, once I had some conversations with the owners who work chiropractors, and like, this is how we treat patients. This is how we all work together. I'm like, why would I want to do it any other way? The other
Yeah.
ways seem actually very limiting. Like now
Yeah.
that I've actually been exposed to this, so I think for most people, it's just am I willing to talk to other practitioners, talk to other business owners, other kind of clinicians, and just see what is your approach and how can we work together to actually accomplish the same goal, which is to help the patient.
Absolutely. Again, that's the end of the day is you're in the business to help patients. What's the best outcome going to be?
Yeah.
So I love that. So what you practice as a clinician for you grew a practice, you came out of school, went to one place, went to another, but then ultimately decided, hey, listen, I want more, right? And it's a very common trend nowadays where it's this term non-clinical, right? People think of going non-clinical. How do I do more, whether it's in med sales or healthcare tech sales or something, or opening their own practice, or
Yeah.
where you're doing more of consulting. So what motivated you to say, either I'm not fulfilled here or I'm trying to do something else? Because that'll probably help someone else that's thinking about that. Like it's probably, I'm sure, a scary leap of faith to do that and leave that pretty good paying job, maybe not great, but good enough to pay all the bills and do most of the things you want
Yeah.
in this country. So what ultimately motivated you to decide to leave and do what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, I think first I want to say, like, you're talking about people saying, can I go a non-clinical route? There's obviously any number of ways you can help people. What's really important in the healthcare space, just like really, I think just about any other space, is what are you actually getting into it for, right? So there's this, what happens a lot with young providers, especially, is they go to school, and I love school, but they're not truthful. They don't tell them, here's the realities of what it's going to be like when you actually graduate. Here's what it's like to actually treat a patient. Here's what it's like to do your notes, get screamed at by doctors. Like this is actually what happens. And very quickly, a lot of providers, I'm talking like within 3 years or so is what I typically see. They're already like, is this it? Like, have I reached my plateau? Is this what healthcare has to offer to me? Because this is not what I thought it was going to be. And then they
Yeah.
get really frustrated and they start questioning themselves. And the more they end up questioning the actual field. So the one thing I would always say is like really tapping into, it sounds cheesy as hell, but like tapping into like your why, like what the hell did you actually get into healthcare for? And a lot of people, I think they just do it. It's not for the money. It's like certainly if you're going to be like a physical therapist in OT, you're definitely not doing it for the monetary reasons. But I think a lot of people, they don't really think long enough ahead of what's, my career going to be like in maybe 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and am I really going to medical school because it's really speaking to what I want to do, or am I just doing it because maybe that's the best way I think I can help people? So
Mhm.
that's number one is like really understand fully what it entails and like speak to people who have experience. Like, what is it really like? Because people ask me like, oh, my daughter wants to go to school for PT. What do you think? I'm like, don't do it because it's trending downwards. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people want to get out of the clinical side is, look, I'm having to see more and more patients, which means less time to spend with them and a lot more time doing what we all hate doing, which is paperwork.
Yeah.
So even in the non-clinical side, I'm like, it's not the worst decision in the world because you definitely don't have to do the paperwork, but is it going to speak to what you actually want to do, which is maybe to help people? And again, there's different ways to do it. So if you're selling equipment, hey, look, I know that my knee arthrosis equipment is helping somebody get their mobility back and get rid of their pain and live their life. Great.
Mhm.
Just go into it for the right reasons.
Correct. Yeah. And that's a big thing. What I talk to clinicians about is listen, number one, don't just make the jump like rash decision, right? I just do it right away and say, I just don't like what I'm doing now. Like really think about like what you want to do because you could end up in the same spot just with a different job title and maybe sometimes even less money because you almost have to take one step backwards to
Yep.
then career, even if it's in sales, you got to get better at that before building up a book of business and knowing physicians and being able to have a network. And then, yeah, the growth trajectory is more than being still a clinician.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I see. So I guess what was the biggest challenge you faced initially? I know you're still in those, like I would call the infancy stages of what you're doing. Obviously, you
Yep.
just made the jump 1 to 2 years ago. So,
Yep.
like, what's been the biggest challenge for you that maybe you didn't expect, but you're almost like embracing at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, I think, the other thing too is like, even with those people that are considering a jump, it's also, do you actually have the experience? Do you have the experience? Do you have the track record? And then for whatever you're looking to maybe transition to, do you have the skill set for that? Right. So I had somebody that she wasn't a clinician, but she was working with me in the clinic and she ended up quitting. This was after I moved out of New Jersey and she quit. She actually went to medical sales and she's like,
Okay.
I hate this. She's like, I hated it. She lasted, I think, like 4 months. And
Yeah.
because she likes working directly with patients. But it's like, do you have the skill set necessary. And, people are like, I worked for 3 years treating patients. Like that translates into this. Like, does it? Do you understand what skills you need to have in this new job that maybe you don't have as a clinician? So for me, making that move, it was really more so about knowing that I was just capped out. So being in the clinic, we're helping hundreds of people, probably thousands every single year. And I'm like, that's nothing that I took for granted. But then really two things is like, A, how do you maybe do it on a bigger scale? And then number two is also understanding that the benefit I had was that our CEO was not from healthcare. His background was in finance
Yeah.
and he worked on Wall Street. So he saw things differently. And it wasn't about making more money, but he was like, he understood business, he understood numbers. And that was a background that I was exposed to that majority of healthcare practices don't have available to them. So for me, it's more about how can I help more people and help other practices, and the trickle down effect of improving a practice or an organization is that they get the ability now to actually take better care of their employees, who then can take better care of their patients. So I think for the most part, when people look at, hey, I'm either maxed out or I plateaued, what's the next step for me? I find that the error that we a lot of times make is we don't give ourselves enough time to actually think and self-reflect. We're just like, all I know is I hate what I'm doing now, or I can't envision doing it for the next 25 years. So something different is better. And then we
Yeah.
take a different job, whether you're getting more money or less. And it's just like, this sucks. It's like you didn't take the time to analyze what's the next step for me. And sometimes that definitely takes a lot of time to figure out. It took me a lot of time to figure out.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where getting that experience and maybe, you don't want to be the person that's doing it within the first 2 years right out of school because it's like, all right,
No.
well, are you going to eventually get into a director role? Are you going to get promoted and maybe love that versus just deciding to make the jump because you're like, this is not what I plan on doing. Like kind of like the minor leagues waiting to get to the major leagues. Like, yeah, it does. You got to ride on the crappy buses for a little bit till you get the private jet stuff.
Yeah.
But
Well, I was gonna say, like, people don't know what they don't know, right? So it's just we're exposed to what we see. And I remember like a while back, I was talking to a chiropractor. She wanted to open her own clinic, and I was just talking to her like, what's your plan? What's your strategy? This and that. She's like, well, I know what we do here is we get patients from here, so I just have to do the same thing. I'm like, that's so very surface level. She was like, I just have to use this marketing platform and then I'll be busy. I'm like, that's not the way it works. So you have to have the experience to understand. You're never going to fully understand everything you don't know. But have I been in a position where I've had to make the executive decision? Right? Have I had to make a hiring or firing decision? Right? So if we don't have the skills necessary for the next step up, my recommendation for everybody is before you try to do it and then fail, which is failure has its place, but do you even know what you need for the next step? Do you have the skills? Again, it's like I don't even know how to talk to a patient who wants to stop treatment, but now I'm going to put myself in a position where I might have to fire an employee. That's probably not going to go too well,
yeah,
right? I
it,
can't even fire a patient who's not even following my treatment plan, but I'm going to terminate an employee who I'm actually paying and I'm like technically supporting their family. So it's just one of these things where experience does matter, and getting some kind of skills ready for the next position, even going from an entry level to a management position. What made you great as an entry level clinician doesn't mean it's going to make you great as a director or a manager. Those are different skills that you need to, upskill, so to speak.
absolutely. And like there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes of if you're focusing now like on just opening your own clinic and forming a practice, like there's so much more than just
Yep.
being the clinician. Like everyone thinks I'll just do it, I'll collect payments and I'll do it myself and I'll pay my rent and that's great. But then it's like, what does scaling look like? What does processing look like? What do referrals look like? That's just surface level stuff. And if you don't have any experience as just like an entry level, not saying people haven't done it before, right? There's always the people that maybe started it a couple years out of school and are successful, but for everyone that did that, how many hundreds of other ones tried that and just said this isn't for me and went back to where
Correct.
they started. So I think that getting that experience, that experience under your belt before doing it, and then having a conversation with the people that are in charge of you, saying what they like, what they don't like, to see if it's for you. I think that just gaining that knowledge, like you did, where you said, okay, I started, then I got into a growth position, I changed jobs, or not, same job but a different place, and then learned like, okay, then how can I go apply that and make it on a bigger scale, right? And then have a
Yeah.
bigger impact. But you didn't do that 2 years out of school. You got the experience to then say, all right, I don't really like what I'm doing, but then how can I do something similar in the same space, just having a bigger impact, which I think is something for people to learn and get a lot of value out of.
Yeah, I mean the other aspect too, though, is that even if you say, all right, I'm out for 2 years, I could do it. The other aspect of that though is, are you asking the people who are in management or ownership, are you asking them questions that are non-clinical? Like, are you actually asking them questions related to business? Like, do you take the time to understand the billing? Do you take the time to understand how insurance works? And all, and that's what it boils down to. So there's really this aspect of being curious and asking business related questions, even though at that point in our in our journey, it's like I'm still trying to figure out how to just be a better clinician. I'm like, being better in business actually makes you a better clinician.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, again, if you don't understand insurance and you want to maybe over treat a patient, you're screwing them over because now maybe they can't treat later on, or maybe you end up having to send them a bill because you treated them for stuff that's not maybe medically necessary, and now they went from being really happy with their outcome to maybe pissed or upset that they now have like $1,000 bill.
Yeah.
So it does actually make you a better clinician, but that doesn't mean it's not going to stop you from asking questions. And I will also add that if you have a manager or owner who is not willing to share that information, that's a place you definitely want to leave because they
Yeah.
shouldn't be afraid of hiding information from you. It should just be, I want to educate and help you grow. And if they're like, I'm more worried about you opening your own place and hurting me, so I'm not going to tell you this information, that's not somebody you want to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I different industry, but I remember my barber, who's a client of mine I'm really close with. He worked at a barber shop, and that's where I met him. And there's been 5 barbers that have worked there and since gone out and opened their own barber shops. And the guy who hired them all couldn't have been more thrilled, more happy. They're all successful, and it didn't affect any of his business because he's still growing and bringing. And I think that mentality of not looking at it as a threat, willing to teach. And these are for maybe someone who's older that's listening to this that owns a practice and is like, should I? And maybe they're afraid of saying, if I tell them this, they're going to be like, I'm going to leave and do my own thing. Well, isn't that kind of maybe the job for
That's
the
the goal.
industry, right?
That's
Isn't
the
that
goal.
better? Isn't that better for the industry if you teach them and they learn how to do it properly? Won't that make the entire industry look better as a whole? And that's the way I would think about it. I mean, am I wrong in thinking that?
No, I mean, look, if you're in a leadership position, if you're an owner, you're in a leadership position. Now, fortunately, that doesn't actually qualify you as a leader,
Yes.
but the high level people that are out there, whether they're in a leadership position or not, their major goal is to develop other leaders. And inevitably, when you do it the right way and you're working with people who actually want to go on that journey usually takes them to places where you're not working with them, right? Because it's like, okay, now I'm ready for the next step, and the next step means I'm not going to be here. They
Yeah.
don't try to restrict that or hold that back. Like you said, they're almost like their biggest support, their biggest champion. It's like, good, go out, help the next crop of people, help the next crop of clinicians or whoever it is, or the next crop of barbers. Like train people like I did. More than enough people, unfortunately, that are in pain or have medical conditions that require care. It's like there's no limitation here. It's not that you're like 2,200, we're all like healed and stuff. Like, and there's a limit of patients. Like, there's more than enough for everybody. So if you're in that
Yeah.
leadership position, it's like, how do I actually help other people grow and develop, and then create a process where they're going to do the same thing?
I love that. It's a great mentality to have, and definitely need more of that in the industry, especially in healthcare, because there's a lot of bad things going. Like everyone's always negative, 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 but I think there's also a lot of positive stuff to look at too from that perspective. So I like that. So you wrote a book, right? And I know it was you and your co-founder, and it's called The Dark Side of Healthcare Management: How to Conquer the Daily BS to Increase Revenue. So tell me more about like what went into that book, maybe what inspired it, what's the message behind it, so our listeners can, if they're interested, find out more about it. But I'm genuinely interested as well, to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's the realities of legitimately trying to run a practice, and if you're in a management position, even if it's honestly you're non-medical and maybe you're a practice manager, it's just understanding what are you going to be dealing with on a daily basis, and what does it actually mean to have to run a successful, because it's not just like run anything to the ground, but how do you run a successful clinic? So when we look at the approach that we take with organization, that's what we really built the book around a lot. It's, what kind of leadership do you have? And then what are some of the challenges that you're going to deal with that people maybe won't tell you? You know, and again, like the stuff that we learn in school that we learn through experience, but nobody maybe preps us for. And understanding, all right, how do I make this company more efficient? How do I create maybe some systems? How do I make the patient experience better? That they're not waiting weeks to make an appointment or to not have to call us and then spend 10 minutes on hold. You know, what are some of the things I need to really pay attention when I'm actually building out a culture, right? Because that's one thing we discuss a lot in healthcare in terms of burnout. It's how much am I working, but then am I getting any kind of appreciation or gratitude my way too? And it's just sometimes in leadership, it's like, all right, if I just keep people, you know, happy and motivated, that's all I have to do. But then we forget about stuff like keeping them accountable and maybe having the hard conversation that we all would like to avoid, but we know is necessary to actually help our fellow teammates. And then understanding it's not just a matter of what's going on right now, because it's very easy to just focus on, all right, what's some of the regulations? Like, you know, we have a new presidency. So what are some of the things that they're doing that's going to affect our patients? But then it takes us away from being able to think, what do we need to do for the next 6 months? Or what does our 24-month roadmap look like? You know, what happens if this insurance that we take, that's like half of our patients? What happens if all of a sudden the reimbursements go significantly down, like overnight? What do we do then? You know, so it's a matter of having strategies that are put in place for what we're doing now, but then also to be able to create something long term and sustainable. And that really is, if you're definitely opening a business, pretty sure nobody opens it with the aspirations of having to shut down very soon, right? Like nobody says, I want to open a business so I can be
Yeah,
one of those statistics that shows how quickly we fail. It's like, no, I want to be the ones that make it.
correct.
But then we don't think about what does it take long term to actually make it. It's just I got to survive every day. So when we, you know, put the book out, it's just obviously a snippet. I mean, it could have probably written like 1,000 pager, but it's like, what are some of the stuff that you're maybe the majority of people are not focusing on when they're in the position of running a practice, and what should you really start paying attention to know, are we actually really doing as well as we thought? And it's not to beat people up, but it's also to help people identify what does a 10 out of 10 look like? Like, what does peak optimal leadership look like? What does peak optimal systems look like? I mean, we think about clinicians, what's the perfect therapist for my company?
Mhm.
Okay, that's your 10 out of 10, but then you don't do that for some of the most critical and crucial aspects of your business, which is like, I think it's doing good. How do you know? I don't know, the eye test. You know, and that's what we wanted to just help people see. Like, there's different stuff you need to evaluate to actually help your practice really grow and thrive and just overcome like the crap that we have to deal with. It's enough to deal with patients canceling, rescheduling, insurance, denials, reimbursements going down. Like, there's enough to make our life difficult. We don't need to make it any harder.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, from my perspective, I see a lot of owners that are focused on or being in the business, right? Not enough on the business.
Yes,
And that's kind of like a cliche, but it's so true. You know,
it is true.
you look at the industry of like you came into this career as a clinician, so it's honestly no fault of your own to feel like, well, I am running the business, I need to be treating.
Yeah,
And yes, when you first start out, like you're probably not going to have 50 employees, right? You might have one other person, or maybe it's just you. But then that scaling point, a lot of times it's hard to remove themselves from that. And I think what you were talking about, which was being able to look at all the other stuff you can't do if you're only treating patients every single day. You don't have time to look at the books and identify, gaps or places to increase revenue, or are you overexposed to one insurance without you even realizing it? So,
yeah.
in your experience as a consultant, is that the norm? Are you seeing that as well? Like a lot of owners are so caught up in the business and then almost like they're like clearing the windshield and saying, "Oh wait, there's so much more there that I need to be worried about, higher level than just
Yeah.
treating."
No, I mean, you have to, I think part of it, there's a few things there. Number one is that there's a certain personality, and we all have a personality, but there's a certain clinician personality. And usually it's somebody who's like, we call them kind of an artist, that they feel comfortable and way better when they're hands-on with a patient.
Mhm.
That's their comfort zone. That's what I'm great at. That's what I went to school for. But then we don't have that other personality that lends us to business acumen or just wanting to look at that because maybe it's boring or it's not, it doesn't light me up. That doesn't
Yeah.
speak to my passion. to look at a KPI.
Yeah.
So we all as human beings want to do what makes us feel good and puts us in our zone. And it's for most clinicians, it's treating patients. But
Mhm.
overall, you have to then ask yourself the question of what does it take to run a successful business? Like, what is necessary of me? And if it really comes down to like, I don't want to stop treating patients, then who do I need to bring in or hire to help me actually run a business? Because that's what, again, we're talking about. I don't care if you're in healthcare is a field dominated by altruistic individuals, but again, if you're not making money, you're not staying open, or you're not giving bonuses and raises and getting new equipment and helping your patients.
Mhm.
So it really just comes down to we don't have a lot of us don't have the personality for it. So it's then asking the question of what do I need to do to either get myself a little bit more to that kind of personality that I need to have of understanding numbers and developing that acumen, or who do I need to hire? Do I need to hire somebody who's not a medical provider and maybe that practice manager whose background is in business and can
Mhm.
actually do that for me? So this aspect of understanding our own strengths and weaknesses. Most of our weaknesses never get better. So if you hate numbers, which if you're a business owner, you shouldn't, but if you
Mhm.
like, I hate math, I hate numbers, I don't want to look at it, then that's probably not going to get much better. So hire somebody that can help. And that's really what it boils down to. And then the other aspect too, though, that I see a lot from clinicians is if they stop treating patients, they're like, what do I do with all my time? How do I fill my day? Right? Because I'm not going to look at spreadsheets for 8 hours a day. That's ridiculous. And no, you definitely don't need to. So it's also knowing what's manageable. Instead of seeing maybe 80 or 90 patients a week, can I see 20 patients a week? Maybe those, if you're experienced enough, maybe it's VIP patients,
Mhm.
something like that. And then that gives me enough time. Or a novel concept of do I have training with my staff? Do I have the time to carve out maybe a training program? Or if I'm not, how am I getting them better outside of just having them take CU courses? Am I using any of my experience to actually teach them? So there's time, but that's what I feel like people, I've definitely seen that even from directors who go from having a full caseload. And I was the same way. You're very resistant to wanting to give that up, especially if you're like, I
Yeah.
love it. But then when you think about how can I impact the rest of the team to my max ability, well, I can't do it if I have a full caseload myself. And that's actually what did it for me. I was like, I'm pouring so much into my own patients. How can I really be helping them as much? And
Yeah.
then if even if I'm able to help them, what's being sacrificed? My own time for sure. I mean, I was working like 60 plus hours to the point where my wife's like, you gonna spend some time with me? Or so something's always gonna get sacrificed and you have to look long term. It's like, what am I actually like, what are the negative consequences of me doing things the way I'm doing? Also understanding the positive consequences, but usually you start to see a pattern. It's like, oh, there's way more negatives. I need to start making this shift.
I think there's a lot of humility with that too, because, I've seen with most healthcare clinicians, whether you're a physician or a surgeon or a PT or an OT, it doesn't matter. You go through more schooling than the average individual, and you are an expert in that field, more than 99.9% of the population. But it's very hard, and that's that Dunning-Kruger effect, which everyone's susceptible to. Of you're so good at one thing, making the assumption that the other things that you're going to be into that you don't know as much about, but you assume because you're an expert in one thing that translates. And I think a lot of business owners make that mistake when they start a practice is, well, I'm really good at this. And they're really good at treating patients, knowing the human body, the musculoskeletal system. But when it comes to actually running the business, having the humility to say, like you said, let me go hire a CFO or even a CEO to just run the business for me so that I can focus on what I do best and then eventually learn from them. And then maybe I take that role down the line. And I think that's scary at first. But I think there's a lot of humility in that. And that the best owners I've seen have been willing to delegate those types of things, and not necessarily give up control either. They're
Yeah.
still the decision maker. You're still the owner, but it's saying, which seats can I put the best people in? Can I hire a PT who wants to become a director and has shown that and give them a little bit more responsibility so that I can spend more time, like you said, developing the training or going and finding better referrals, right? What doctors do I know or what doctors can I network with in the community? If you're treating 80 patients a week,
Yep.
you're not doing that, right?
One more.
So I love
Yeah.
that point there as well. And,
No,
and
I
just
mean,
to, Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say too is like, even if you think about what it takes to be a great clinician, is like every patient really respects the provider who says, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? It's like versus the provider that gives them a bunch of bullshit. It's just like, and then you try to wing it. It's like, you got to be honest, like, I'm not really sure. Right. So when you can have that ability to just be honest with yourself and be honest with everybody else, it actually allows you to, create things that are way better. And if we're talking about a business, it allows you to create a business that grows bigger and actually quicker because then, like you said, you bring on the right people. And even like the question that we've been asked is if I'm hiring somebody to improve my business, maybe it's like a consultant like me, when is the right time, right? Should I wait until I'm already doing good? Should I do it at the very beginning? And I also people as soon as possible because even if at the very beginning we have no patience, maybe it's like, what are we putting in place to make sure we can grow the right way? Because then we see a lot of people who they're able to start growing, but then it's shit, you know what? I never even created any systems. I never created any maybe SOPs, and now we're making a ton of mistakes. We're actually losing revenue. We're bleeding money because we're not capturing all this stuff. So it's really the best time to do things are at the beginning. And if you're like, I don't really have the background, it's like that's the best time to bring on somebody who does. So maybe you could just focus on what you're good at, which is talking to patients and treating them, and have somebody handle the stuff that you're maybe not good at, but might want to learn over time.
It's the same thing with we talk when building wealth, right? If you get the basics down
Yep.
from the beginning, when you have no
Yes.
money, it translates into when you actually have money. And the people you see it all the time with like lottery winners or people that come into a ton of money and they inherit it from family members and then they just blow it
Yep.
because they don't have the right habits in place. We pretty much a lot of people understand that, at least if they're financially literate. But then when it comes to running a business, it's like that stuff goes to the wayside. It doesn't exist. It's like, no,
Yep.
I'm going to wait until this or until then or until I have it. And it's like, I know in my career, the best results have come from when I just made myself extremely uncomfortable, probably did something that like a coach that I couldn't afford, took the leap of faith and said, you know what, I'll figure it out because I don't know it right now already. So worst cases, I wasted a little bit of money that can come back. And I think a lot of owners can learn from that and say, when can I go find someone to lessen the learning curve so that I can make less mistakes? And then 5 years from now, I'm making 10x what I would have been
Yeah.
making if I tried to do it all myself.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right? Is like, how do I accelerate the timeline? It's
Mhm.
one of those things, and you're still on the very young side, but you probably thought about this a little bit already too, which is as we get older, do you look back and say, is that question like if I knew then, or if I know now, if I knew then what I know now, it's like, well, fortunately you couldn't do that. But the question, and I used to do that too, then the question I was like, man, I just would have liked to accelerated. Like the process that we went through is what made us who we are. But I'm like, it would have been nice to take like a 10-year process and maybe get it down to 5 years. Like that 5 extra years really would have came in handy. So that's the goal. Like when we're starting a business, or maybe you're doing really well, and it's like, what does the next step look like for me? And
Absolutely.
how long do I want it to take to get there? That's where somebody with expertise can really help. And then if we think about it, like honestly, very simplistic. I mean, majority of us watch sports. I don't know one sport that doesn't have a coach. Like one athlete, whether it's an individual sport like tennis or golf, or a team sport like football, they all have coaches. I'm
Yeah.
like, even the best people in our society, like the Warren Buffetts and the Tony Robbins of the world, they have coaches. But then we have people who are like struggling and don't know probably a 20th of certain people, and like, oh, I'm just going to try to struggle on my own. So there's this, you mentioned humility. It's not noble to struggle by yourself, like to suffer, because then some of us want to that's like a way to show that we're able to handle it. And then when we're having conversation with people, like honestly, for some people, it's just a way to kind of gain some significance. It's like,
Yeah.
look at listen to all my struggles and all this crap that I'm
It's
going
like a
through.
badge of honor almost.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Versus like, how's things go? And just things are going great. Like I hired somebody, we're crushing it, we're helping patients. It's like that story for some reason for a lot of people isn't as sexy as the woe is me story. And it's that you have to swallow your pride. And again, if you open a business, what was the point of it? Yeah, make money. I love money as much as the next person, but it's like we're trying to help people too. So how can we do that on a grander scale?
Absolutely. That's a great perspective of the best people in the world have coaches. And that's kind of the mentality. I'm like,
Yeah,
Kobe Bryant, who's my kind of idol growing up in basketball, was like, he hired Michael Jordan's coach. He said,
yes.
who's the best coach coaching the best person? I want to be like them, so let me go hire that person. So we should apply that to our business and or any areas of our life. Trying to get fit, get healthier. get off YouTube. Like that's a starting point, but go
Yes.
find someone who can actually show you the ropes. I'm a big believer in that. So
Go to the
just to kind
expert.
of, yeah, exactly, exactly. So just to kind of wrap everything up, for anyone that's sitting out there and a lot of people that watch this and reach out to me, they're in that middle ground. They're either thinking about making the leap to starting the practice or either going non-clinical. And you kind of mentioned this earlier, but what would be some kind of like parting words to them to just, whether it's to think about or to do if they're in that space and thinking like, is this going to be for me or what should I do? Maybe to bring yourself back into your shoes of what
Yeah.
helped you do that.
Yeah. So starting a practice, starting a business is not, for the faint of heart, so to speak. So I kind of equate it to like having a kid. Like, don't do it unless you're really like committed to like the challenges that are going to come your way. That was one of the things that I was always considered myself blessed. I was like, I'm not running a practice, so I don't need to worry about the bills. None of that crap. If something gets denied, I know that in 2 weeks I'm still getting paid.
Hmm.
So it's really the biggest thing with being an entrepreneur is, we hear about it, but we don't really understand what it means. But it's mindset. Like, do you have the mental fortitude to get your ass handed to you over and over again and still be willing to come back for more? That's really what being an entrepreneur is. So like you see stuff on social media, it's all glamorized. And it's like, making seven figures and this and that. It's like, that looks great. That's not reality. Reality is you're going to get your ass handed to you. And if we go by stats, which, I always laugh when I think of people in healthcare, we're so statistics dominated. Like everything we do is like best practices and medicine and this, stat, and this study. But then we don't look at things that are really critical for our own survival, which is entrepreneur stats, maybe. Like how
Hmm.
many businesses fail, right? It's like how many fail in the first year, the 5 year, the 10 year mark. It's like majority. So like, what are they doing or not doing that's leading to failure? And what can I avoid? So there's definitely this aspect of number one is getting your mindset to the point where, hey, if I get kind of to Mike Tyson's verbiage, if I get punched in the face, how am I going to respond? And
Yep.
then number two, tough times happen. So am I adaptable? Do I have the resiliency? And if you're not sure, it's look at your past when you've had some tough times and how did you react? And it's not always going to be the response you like. Maybe there's situations like, man, I always kind of crumble. It's like you might not be an entrepreneur maybe right now, unless you work on those skills. So that's number one. And then for the person who's like, is healthcare for me? I think the best thing to do is I've had some people leave the field and they're like, this is just not for me. I'm like, all right, before you make the decision, I want you to understand what skills do you need to improve upon that you're maybe even relevant towards healthcare. What I mean by that is, we get into the space, especially in a outpatient kind of setting, where we just expect patients to come to us and be very motivated. And I always laugh when people graduate, like, oh, the patient's so motivated. I'm like, all right, you'll find out really quick. And they're not. So
Yeah.
it's like these skills that I need to be a great clinician to have them come in and follow my treatment plan. Do I have the skills to influence people? Do I have the skills to build rapport, to be empathetic? So it's understanding what skills are relevant now that maybe I'm not so great at that are actually really important. And then one of the biggest challenges we have overall in society is just communication. And especially if you're younger, like even a guy like you grew up on tech, right? It's
Yeah.
like not a lot of face-to-face conversations anymore. It's DMing, text messaging. So we lose the ability to really communicate at a high level. So that's one of the things that I always tell people, like improve your communication skills, know how to read body language, know how to ask questions, because too many of us are in a rush to want to just speak and tell everybody about ourselves and not take the time to learn about anybody else. So it's swallow the ego, improve your listening skills, figure out how to ask good questions. That's something I struggled with when I was younger. And when you can do that, and then start taking some time to self-reflect of what do I actually want to do? And it boggles my mind how many people don't do that with their life. Like literally we have only one life and it's like I never even think about what my future holds. I'm like, that is crazy. Like you take zero time
Yeah.
and it's just the mentality that we have now is just rush, it's rush, rush, rush. Right? And that's on our phone, we're doing this, and it's like, I don't have time. I'm like, look at your freaking phone. How many hours you spend on that? And then you're telling me you can't spend 1 hour to focus on your life, like to focus on your goals. Like that's, I mean, most people don't even set goals for the year. So think about how many people don't set goals for their life.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at like, what do I want to do if healthcare is not, and I'm telling you guys right now, healthcare is not for everybody. As I said, if somebody was like, I want to be a PT, I'm like, don't. There's other ways to help people. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So it's understanding then what is going to resonate with me. I'm not a big fan of just saying always follow your passion, because if your passion is staring at the clouds, that's not going to help you raise a family or
Survive.
buy a house. Yeah, like you
Yeah.
still have to have income, and especially Jersey is not cheap, but it's like, what is actually going to make me feel motivated?
Mhm.
And it's not being motivated 24/7, like this mentality that I have to like everything about my job. It's like, that's bullshit. Like, you're going to have things in your job that you hate. I did, and I loved where I was working, but I was like, I hate doing this, but it's part of the job.
Yeah.
So it's knowing what is going to actually speak to you and what push you towards getting into medicine, and what outside of medicine is still going to give you that same feeling. And if it's, I want to help patients, then just figure out how to do that, knowing that there's a ton of options to do that.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. That's really great insight. And for anyone listening, what's the best way for people, whether they're a practice owner or maybe there's someone who's thinking about making the leap and just looking for advice, best way for them to connect with you? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely go on LinkedIn. The website is tbpstrategies.com. So those are probably the two best places to go. And
Perfect.
then, yeah, I mean, we could drop some links, like, the ebook and all
Yeah,
that. But
I'll
those,
put
those are,
everything on
yeah,
there.
those are the two best places to reach me. I'm obviously on Instagram and whatnot. So if you just, yeah, reach out if you have questions. Like, I'm here to help. And like, we have discovery calls, complimentary. If you just want to talk, like you're working through some stuff and not sure what the hell to do, it's like, again, we're here to help, give advice, and see what we can do to make your future a lot better than maybe where it's at now.
Absolutely, Dan. Well, thanks for coming on, man. It's good chatting with you.
John, I appreciate it, dude. Have a great rest of the day.
You too.